Now that we're aware of the process that we need to go through in order to get our Android app running on our phone, as well as getting the binary that we would utilize to go on the Google Play Store and go through the release procedure, we need to go through the same process for iOS. And so the way that we would do that is we would run Expo build iOS. Now, you have to be aware that when we build for iOS, first of all, we need a bundle identifier. This is just an identifier that the app is going to use in order to know, hey, this is my unique name, my unique identifier. So we'll take the one that's auto-generated. And now we get to choose the build type. So for iOS, there are different build types. It's not an APK and an Android app bundle. No, it's an archive or a simulator. So we can determine whether or not we want to build in order to run a production grade app on our simulator, or we want to deploy the build to the store. Either process has different requirements. So if we go down the route of archive, now it's going to ask us, do you have credentials for Mobini in the project Meals to Go? Okay, so it's going to access the credentials. Do we have the access to the Apple Store account that will be used for submitting to the App Store? Well, now the question becomes, if we're in a live environment, if we're at a company, do we have access to credentials that are going to be used to deploy to the App Store? In this case, what we'll say is no. And now it says, no problem. We can auto-generate credentials if we don't have them to the main Apple account, right? But we can still set up for the upload credentials. So will we provide our own distribution certificate? So here is the process where we're saying, okay, we don't have the credentials to deploy to the App Store. They may be in the hands of marketing. They may be in the hands of a different department altogether. But now the question is, will you provide your own Apple distribution certificate? Well, in this case, we'll say, let Expo handle it. Okay, so now we have to enter your Apple Developer Program credentials. If you do not have an Apple Developer Program credential, what you need to do is you need to go over to developer.apple.com, and then you need to enroll in the program. Now you can enroll as an individual or as an organization, and this will enable you to release to the App Store. Luckily, I already have an account, so my Apple ID is this email. And for the password, I will quickly fill out the password. And so if I hit enter here, what it's going to do is it's going to authenticate against the Apple Developer Portal. And it's going to ask for access. So we're going to fill in our 6-digit code here that it's going to show us, 502992. And then it's going to request for a session. And what it's going to say is, now failed to prompt for all the credentials. Next time you build automatically, it will use the credentials. You have no team associated with your Apple account. Now we need to make sure that we have a paid Apple developer account. Do we actually have a paid Apple developer account? That is a good question. If we look at the status of the changes that it's made, well, now we're basically in a state where we need to make sure that we have an Apple developer account. Otherwise, we cannot even begin to build the output that is required to run our app on our phone. This is one of the cruxes of Apple development. So let me go and make sure that I have an Apple developer account. And so as you can see over here, currently I am not enrolled in the Apple developer program. Now, if you've subscribed to the Apple developer program, you can go through this. I can reapply to the Apple developer program. And so what I've done is I've gone through the process of renewing my membership. And so the same would apply to you if you tried to apply this Expo build iOS without having the proper account information. So let's go through this again. Now we're going to say no here, and we're going to say let Expo handle the process. Again, we're going to authenticate against the portal, and if authenticated successfully, it's now creating a distribution certificate and all of that stuff now that I have a valid Apple account. Again, will you provide your own Apple push notification service? Again, we're going to let Expo handle it. So we're going to go let Expo go through the process of setting up our Apple developer account, setting up everything that needs to be set up in terms of provisioning profiles and all of that good stuff. Now we've run into another error. Runtime error. Could not find app with bundle ID com.beanie.meals to go. Interestingly enough, it's run into an error. So if we go here to our bundle and certificates list, what we can see here is that we have an iOS distribution certificate. We do not have any identifiers. We have a device set up. But what we need to do here is we need to add an app ID. So let's add an identifier. So we'll add an app ID. We'll hit continue. We'll say app. We'll hit continue. And what we'll say over here is that the bundle ID needs to be com.mobini.meals to go. So we need to make sure that that's set up in our account. We'll say meals to go. Now we can determine what access it will have. We should allow something called push notifications. We should enable this. Register. And now that we've registered meals to go, we can try this process again. Archive. No. Let Expo handle it. And then we'll sign in. It's going to try to create the provisioning profiles again. It's going to try to optimize the assets. And now it's actually able to set everything up in order to release our application. So now it's built and optimized our resources, our source maps, and our code. And it's uploading our build over here on Expo. And what we can see if we go over to builds is that now a build has started for iOS. And so Expo is now generating the necessary files for iOS. So it's important to note here that we needed to set up the identifier in our certificates, identifiers, and profiles in order for Expo to be able to manage the output build. And once this is done building, we'll show you how to run this on your phone. Now that our iOS build is finished of Meals to Go, we can do the same thing we did on Android, and we can download the IPA file. This is the iPhone application file. So it's a bit different than what Android outputs because it's supposed to run on iOS. And when we download this file, what we can do or what we can try is to try to run it on our simulator. And the way that we would do that is if we go over here and we took our IPA file, we could drag and drop it into the simulator. And by dragging and dropping it into the simulator, what would happen is it would try to save it on the iPhone. Now, this doesn't work. This doesn't work at all. This is not how iOS goes and installs files. So it works fairly differently than it would on Android. This is not how we go about installing these applications. You can't just drag and drop an IPA file. So how do we run it on our simulator then? Well, what we can do is we can go back to Expo Build iOS and we can specifically save the simulator build. So this is going to create an optimized build specifically to run on the simulator. It cannot be opened on a legitimate iPhone, but you could drag and drop it on your simulator. So if we go back over here to Expo Builds, what we're going to see is that we've queued a build specifically for the simulator. And once this build has finished, what we can do is we can download the output and drag and drop that into our simulator. And so while this build is processing for the simulator, you may be asking, well, how do I run it on an actual device? Well, to test it on a device, you need to use something called Test Flight. And then you need to download the IPA file to your local machine, which we had already done. And with the App Store Connect, which is a specific app that you need to use in order to upload, you need to upload this IPA file into Test Flight. So there's a whole process here that can only be done if you have an iOS device, if you have a MacBook. You cannot do this on a Windows machine. You cannot do this on a Linux machine. So we're running into the limitations of being outside of iOS and the Apple environment. So now that this simulator build has completed, we can press the download button here. And what we're going to see is that where it downloaded an IPA for the production build, now it's downloading a tar.gz, so a zip file. Interesting. What will that zip file contain? And it's way smaller. And if we open that zip file up, what we're going to see is that it's going to output this meals to go that we can drag and drop inside of our simulator. And what that's going to do is it's going to install a simulator build of our production app. And now we can see meals to go running on our simulator. If we open that up, what we can do now is we can test out our application as if it was a production build that was coming from the App Store. And what we can then see is that we're able to test our application and all of the different aspects. And unlike Android, where we needed to set up a Google Maps key because Android works with Google Maps, the Apple Maps works out of the box and does not need those additional steps in order to function. So knowing that, we now know the different types of builds that we can generate for iOS. We can generate a production level build that can only be distributed through TestFlight to live devices, Apple TestFlight, or we can generate an iOS simulator build that can actually run on our simulator to test what exactly is going on. Now, with that said, this is the actual build that we need to submit to the Apple App Store in order to get that running. So let's take a look at how that would work. Now that we've tested our app bundle on our simulator, the question becomes, well, how do we test it on our device? But also, how do we release it to the App Store? And so if you go to appstoreconnect.apple.com and you log into your account, here is where you will do your submission. This is where you submit your app to the App Store. And if we go over to My Apps, you can create an app, a new app, and you can go through the submission process. As we can see here, I've set up Meals to Go. And if we click on this and we go over into TestFlight, we can see that this is where we can set up build testing for our IPA file. Remember the IPA file we downloaded that came inside the original build that we did, not the test run that we did in our simulator? Well, in order to test that file, we need to upload the build over here in App Store Connect TestFlight. So if we click on See Upload Tools, this is how you upload an IPA to App Store Connect. You can upload your binary with Xcode. You can upload them with the AL tool, and you can upload them with the Transporter app. Now, all of these different ways are basically similar, but you need a Mac app in order to do this. So if we go over here and we say download the Transporter app, and we say open in the App Store, what we can see over here in the App Store is the ability to install the Transporter app, which is going to upload the file into TestFlight. And so once we've installed this app, what we'll basically do is we'll go through the process of uploading the IPA file into TestFlight and then testing it on our phone. So opening that up, we'll agree to the terms of service, we'll sign in, and we'll say our account information, we'll fill that in, fill in our password. And then once we've signed into our Apple ID, what it's going to do is it's going to get to App Store Connect. We're going to add an app, right? Add app. And what we can do over here is we can say over in our downloads folder, we have the date modified and we have our IPA file. And if we open that IPA file, what we'll be able to do is upload that. So now we can click deliver. And so it's going to send it over to App Store Connect. Currently, it's verifying and analyzing the app output that was generated by Expo. And then once it's done doing that, based on the identifier and everything around that, it's going to send it over into our App Store Connect over here. And we'll be able to see it in our TestFlight builds. We'll be able to select it. And so as you can see, it's currently uploading the app to App Store Connect. And once it's uploaded the app, that's where we can go and connect our builds into TestFlight. So right now it's delivering the app. And if we go over here and we see what happened in the log, it basically uploaded. Now, if we go over here into TestFlight, what we'll be able to do is when we reload, we'll see version 0.0.1. So we've now uploaded a version into App Store Connect. And the way that it was connected is through that bundle identifier. When Expo built the version of the app, it built it with the same identifier that we set up when we initially set up our app in the Apple developer platform. Okay, so how do I test this on my phone now? So the way that we allow people to test our application is over here in the iOS build section of TestFlight, we can see that our build is currently processing. But if we go over here to the internal and external groups, what we can see is that as if we click on App Store Connect users, App Store Connect users can use TestFlight on all devices and all active builds. So if we add a tester, what we need to do is we need to add our admin account as a tester. Now, no builds are currently available as the current build is still processing. Once this build has been processed, it will become available in the TestFlight app. So we have to wait in order for the processing to be done. And once it's done, we can test out our application. Once our build has been processed by TestFlight, we now will get a confirmation email of an invite to test Meals to Go, because when there are no active builds, you will not get the invite. But once there's an active build to test, you will get an email inviting you to test. And if we say view in TestFlight, this will allow us to accept the invite to test our Meals to Go, which will install it locally on our production phone. And once we've installed Meals to Go, we can then go ahead and test it as if it was downloaded live from the App Store. So we're basically, through TestFlight, going to install and download the version that is going live on the App Store. And so if we test that out, mo@beanie.io, and we do test 1, 2, 3, what we can see here is that the app is the same that we were testing in development mode, but now it's a production build. It's very smooth, and it's very capable of allowing us to test out all of the different functionality that we would see in a production app. We were able to give feedback through TestFlight. TestFlight is basically an app for quality assurance. It is what is going to go onto the App Store, but it's before the distribution to the App Store. So you could invite multiple testers. You could invite a bunch of different people before your app is actually submitted to the App Store to test it out. And the way that you would do that is to invite more testers. They would install TestFlight on their app, and then they would have the ability to test out the versions that are available. And so the version that we have right here can also be the version that we distribute over here, right? We could select a build, and so we can now submit multiple builds to TestFlight, and then we can eventually choose which one we're going to send with the submission for the App Store for review. And so the process here is kind of more rigorous and more secure than what you would see with, for instance, the Google Play Store. And that is intentional. The Apple ecosystem has more security parameters in place, a lot more process, but the flow is very similar in terms of all the information you have to supply in order to submit your application and all of these extra things you need to do to get your app ready for deployment. And so with that, we've seen how we can build for Android and deploy that on a phone to test. And we saw where we can deploy on the Google Play Store and all the information we need to fill in. We've seen how we can test on an iOS simulator, a production version of the app, as well as how to upload our app to the App Store Connect, test our app through TestFlight on a live production phone, and also go through the motions of seeing how those builds can be sent to different people to test, and adding testers and adding the ability to kind of have a more holistic process. So very different ecosystems, very different distribution processes, very different in general, but we built one code base, and now all we had to do was build two different outputs and follow the processes that are in place for both stores. Now, this is usually a process that is handled by a different department or by a more senior member of your team, so forth and so forward, or even automated, because you only do it once, and once you do it from there on, it's just about distributing updates. I hope this was useful. Always reach to the documentation of Expo, as it is very detailed and very useful for you to go through the process of the detailed steps that you may need to take.